Mr. Misfits.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Ministry Misfits. Andrew and I are back in studio today.
Yes.
Hopefully we've got great internet connection.
Not likely, but we are here.
But we've got great discussion lined up.
Yes, we do. And we should be able to actually, hear you this time.
That's right, yeah. Instead of me trying to switch between computer to phone to hearing, I was basically a live stream of 3-second delay and then cutting you off. It was kind of a mess. But
yeah, it worked. We got through it. The blog is up.
Yes.
So if you couldn't stand the choppiness of the episode, then at least go read the blog because you'll get the basis there. MinistryMisfits.com, go to the blog. My cough is still here, but not quite as bad. So we should be able to work our way through without too much interruption.
Yeah.
At least less interruption than we normally have. So we are going today to continue the accidental mini-series that we started unintentionally last season, and that is probably going to last us for a while because there's a lot we can go through and that we never intended to do, so there's no timeline. You may remember that we accidentally have started this mini-series walking through the different fruits of the Spirit. Last week, we mentioned it. This week, we're actually going to do it intentionally and just now actually call it a mini-series. So for our YouTube podcast listeners, by the time you're listening to this or watching this, you should be able, if you don't know what we're talking about, we should actually have the mini-series started out in a playlist now on YouTube, as well as the video section on the website. We've already done 2 different ones. We've done Love and Peace.
Did we do Joy?
We did not do Joy.
We just talked about it.
We kind of talked about it very, very briefly last week when we talked about a different type of fruit of the Spirit than what actually is normally listed as a fruit of the Spirit, but we consider a fruit of the Spirit. When we talked about contentment last week, we did define the difference between joy and happiness. We also looked at it with a couple of the other fruits of the Spirit that are involved there. We've also done an episode on the renewing of our mind back in January, where this is not technically a fruit of the Spirit, but it is a fruit of the Spirit's working, and so it counts. So we've got 4 episodes out, plus this one that we're doing today, talking about the fruit of the Spirit. And part of the thing that is interesting about us doing this, one, is that we just also spent 3 months walking through Galatians. So we've apparently decided that Galatians is going to be the biggie for us within Misfits. The other reason that it's interesting that we've kind of decided to do this is that one of the things that we've been accused of falsely is that we are Pentecostal.
I thought you were going to say 2 women, but
well, that also, which we had that happen this week also, which this time it was not Pastor Andy's fault. It was Meg Wise's fault. But we are falsely accused of being Pentecostal because of the fact that we regularly talk about the role of the Holy Spirit, and because of the fact that we've done an entire episode talking about the Indian Pentecostal movement. But we aren't actually Pentecostal. We come out of evangelicalism. You were not kicked out of evangelicalism, but now attend a non-denominational multi-ethnic church.
Yep.
I was just completely kicked out of evangelicalism, and now I'm attending a non-denominational multi-ethnic church. We're not Pentecostals.
No.
But that's more of the reason why we need to actually talk about the role of the Spirit, because the Spirit is not talked about enough. Another thing that's not talked about enough is some of the actual fruits of the Spirit.
Yes.
You mentioned a while back that we should look into the fruit of Gentleness, because people don't talk about it.
Yeah, I think it was actually through our small group. We were going through the fruits of the Spirit, and I just paused for a second. I was like, wait, gentleness? I was like, we never talk about that. That literally gets kind of skipped over. You sing the Fruits of the Spirit song as you're listing them, and you just kind of jump over that one, and that's where it lies.
And so I wanted to see if that actually was true, or if it's just a matter of where you grew up, or what church you were in, or anything like that. So we asked on social media what one of the fruits of the Spirit you hear about the least. We did have a mixed response, but on every single platform, gentleness was the top pick, followed closely by goodness or patience or self-control, which people talk about patience and self-control a lot. They just don't ever define it.
Yeah.
Goodness seems to be very objective in today's world.
Mm-hmm.
And people talk about being good, but they don't define it. Gentleness, though, just is left off the list completely most of the time. I realized after I published the poll that what I should have done actually is listed every fruit of the Spirit except for gentleness and see if anybody even noticed that it was off the list.
Honestly, I think you probably would have stumped people until there was that person that commented at the bottom, and then
it was like, oh yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Because there again, it's not just that we don't talk about it, it's that it's oftentimes ignored.
Yeah, and I think reflecting on it, there's two different reasons why I think it's initially ignored, at least from a Western American standpoint. Is one, the age difference, where to the fact that gentleness is just something for my children. I want to teach my children how to be gentle when they're interacting with other kids or at the playground. But then also from a sexist side too, of like, well, males, you can't be gentle. Like, that's not something that we're taught as men growing up, is to be gentle unless it's around women. But otherwise, you're supposed to be like this harsh, tough, rugged individual. And so I think that's partially why this gets ignored. Or we just don't know how to give a good definition to it.
Well, and both of those last two things, the misogyny and the definition, is one of those areas where the place that it gets ignored, at least that we have data for, is very much just Western, in English Western specifically, because of the fact that the definition is very, very vague. Webster's says that it's the quality or state of being gentle. Doesn't help. But especially regarding mildness or manners or disposition. So it could just be a state of being, or it could just be talking about manners, or it could be a full-on character trait. Gentle, they describe as being free from harshness, sternness, or violence. So it's either voice, attitude, or action. Or it's described as soft and delicate, which is not the same thing as being free from harshness, sternness, or violence.
No, but we like to mix it up to be.
Or it's called moderate, which is literally it's just there. Doesn't help us at all. And it, especially in a culture war era, it really doesn't help when you have all of these things mixed together, because the people that are always accused of being violent, stern, or harsh are the ones that consider soft and delicate to not be good enough. And moderates are hated by everybody. And so gentleness is going to have a negative connotation on any side that you're on.
Yeah.
You're going to either be too gentle or not gentle enough, and there is no middle ground. The fun thing, though, when we talk about it as a fruit of the Spirit, is that Webster's is completely wrong 100% of everything that they just said.
Which is great.
There are two words that we're going to look at in the Greek when we talk about gentleness. One is protes, which, again, just as gentleness, or it's described as divine meekness. That is not what we had with Webster's one bit.
No.
It's a divine meekness. Specifically, this is the word that we get in Galatians 5 with the fruit of the Spirit. It is a gentle strength. Again, opposite of what Webster's just put out.
Yeah. Another thing I saw was not being overly impressed by a sense of one's self-importance.
Because it's a divine strength.
Yes.
It's a gentle strength. It's a divine meekness. It's not about us. It expresses power with reserve. I can destroy you, but why would I want to do that? It begins with the Lord's inspiration, which comes from the Spirit, and finishes by his direction and empowerment, which is the renewing of our minds, which we talked about in January, we talked about last week. This is the renewing of our minds. This is the fruit of the Spirit versus the spirit of the flesh. We very much have a perfect example of what Paul does in Galatians 5 when we look at the definitions between Webster's and the Bible. Because again, what do we have in Galatians 5? We have the spirit of the, or we have the fruit of the flesh, and then Paul then immediately counters it with the fruit of the Spirit. And they're almost polar opposites. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have here. We have the gentleness of the flesh, which is vague and nobody likes and nobody is wanting to achieve because of what it does. And then you have the gentleness of the Spirit, which can only be achieved by the Spirit. And that is the polar opposite of what the world looks at it as. It is a divinely balanced virtue. We can't have it outside of the Spirit. Just like when we talked about contentment. You cannot be content truly without the Spirit's work.
Yeah.
You cannot be gentle truly without the Spirit's work. Because it only operates through faith, and it operates in a way that, like everything with the Spirit, is about other people and not about ourselves. Which again is not how we teach gentleness when we talk to kids, because it's all about you being gentle because they are delicate.
Yes. Again, I like what you said of I can hurt you, but
I'm not going to.
And I think that's what we think about kids of like, I know you can hit them, but you don't. You shouldn't. Basically, I like that one way.
But why shouldn't we? When we talk to kids, it's because we don't hurt other people.
Yeah.
When we're talking about us as adults, us as ministers, us as people in leadership, us as Christians, I can destroy you, but I'm not going to, because what is my call?
To love God and love others.
To love you, even if you consider me to be your enemy. Mm-hmm. To serve you, even if you think I'm above you, or I technically think I'm above you. It's not about us. It's about the Spirit and the person that's made in that Spirit's image.
Yeah. And also not voicing that, too.
And not wasting it, yes.
No, I'm saying voicing that of, I think people will say, well, I was okay because I told Andrew, well, I'm higher than you, right, and I could destroy you, but I'm not. And people like boast in that. It's like, well
and there's two different ways to look at it, because I'll have to actually go back and listen to the recording if I just misheard you or if you misspoke. It sounded like you said wasting it.
No, I didn't say wasting it.
But that's, again, part of the way that we look at it. Because you look at somebody like Elijah on Mount Carmel. He calls down fire on the people. But based off this definition, he does so in a gentle manner. Because it's not about him. It's not about the work he's doing. It's about the work of the Spirit. The Spirit is going to destroy you. I don't have to. Mm-hmm. And it's done so in a way, though, that is done for the benefit of other people, not for the benefit of himself. We could I would say very confidently say that the destruction of the prophets of Baal was done in a gentle manner. But we do hear people that will claim the prophets of Baal were destroyed in a general manner, so that means that I get to go out and do the same thing.
Yeah.
But Elijah doesn't do that other than one time.
Mm-hmm. We justify other people's action. Well, again,
other people's destruction.
Yeah. Or even calling from the Spirit to justify why they should do stuff
right
outside of the Spirit.
Because if it's not actually done in a manner, this is part of the definition. It's a divinely balanced virtue. There's balance to it. And it operates only through faith. It doesn't operate through ourselves. It operates through faith. And so even when gentleness requires destruction, it's done so through the power of the Spirit and not through our own power. Because if we're going to say that we should always be going out and making the statement of, I can destroy you, but I'm not going to because God tells me not to, that is not a balanced approach.
Correct. That's what I was hinting at, not the wasting.
Right. The wasting of it is what people like to think of as oh, well, we don't throw our pearls to swine, so why would I waste my time dealing with you?
Mm-hmm.
But what it actually should be is what you're talking about, it is not even something that this is something worth me vocalizing.
Correct.
The order that we actually have here. Because it's not about me. It's about what God is going to do in you, not to you. What God is going to do in you is ultimately the goal that we are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side of that, though, there's another word that is used for gentleness. So normally when we talk about gentleness in the Bible, the verse that comes up is what? The one we've been talking about.
Oh, yeah, the fruits of the Spirit.
Fruit of the Spirit. There's one other big one that normally gets quoted, and everybody, again, doesn't even recognize that gentleness is what is being talked about. Out of the chapter we just spent all last week discussing, in Philippians 4, Paul says, let your gentleness... Can you finish the verse?
No.
Let your gentleness be known to everyone.
Mm.
Quoted all the time, but like we said, out of Philippians 4, there's a lot of verses that are in there that get quoted all the time, but not in correct context. Again, this is one that is not really done in correct context because it's never actually defined what Paul is talking about. The word there is epikes, which means to be seemly, equitable, or yielding. Which, again, doesn't really help us at all because those are all just kind of weird words.
Yeah.
But the breakdown of the Greek actually would be a fitting on of justice. That is, again, not how we ever talk about gentleness.
No.
Unless we're trying to justify the way that we are hating other people.
Yeah, justice and gentleness, I feel like, are oil and water. They seem like they're not going to mix in the same spot.
And again, it's because of the culture that we live in.
Yeah.
But when we look at it from a New Testament culture, we can start to see how this all fits together and what this actually looks like. So if we use the definition of gentleness that's more about meekness, which is the prates, we are describing the demeanor of an elder or an apostle a lot of the time. So this is out of 1 Corinthians 4. This is out of 2 Corinthians 10. This is out of 1 Timothy 3. Paul is listing qualifications of the way that our elders and the apostles should go about doing things. This is the demeanor they should have, is one of gentleness, meekness, humility, quiet strength, divine balance. That is what we're talking about. But it also can be used to define the work of the Spirit on an individual. This is what we see in Galatians 5 and Galatians 6, where again, we're contrasting the work of the flesh and the work of the Spirit. It's what we see in Colossians 3. This is why, again, Paul is able to say, consider others more highly. That's why he's able to say, let Christ do the work in you. He's able to say all of these different things that we get out of Colossians 3 because it's about the meekness and allowing the Spirit to do the work in you. It's also James uses in James 1 and James 3 when he's talking about the way that we as believers go about our work. The other place that it's used is to define the community of believers, which we talked about the community of believers a few weeks ago when we did worship. The community as a whole should be defined by meekness. That's what we see in 1 Timothy 6. It's what we see in 2 Timothy 2 when he talks about humility in prayer, of this humble spirit and a meek attitude towards God. It's what we see in Titus 3. Same sort of thing of the gathering of the saints is done in a humble manner. It's what we see in 1 Peter 3. Peter says the same thing Paul does as far as our gentleness is what is going to define us. And like we've said throughout this whole thing, it's normally associated with humble attitudes or humble actions, or just like a lot of the answers we got, it's associated with a lot of other fruits of the Spirit. Because even when we do finally break it down, it still gets mixed in with everything else.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe the love and the joy that I find from going through the fruits of the Spirit is a lot of times we talked about gifts and how individuals may have certain giftings that given from God. But fruits of the Spirit should be attainable for all Christians through the Spirit, that we can have all of them together. And it's just amazing to see how God's planned that, and for all of them to intertwine and work together. And it's not like just this all... I'm only gentle, I'm only this.
And when we actually set out to define them, it makes sense why gentleness ends up getting left off most of the time. Because gentleness is about humility and meekness and quietness and quiet strength. Love, as we see in 1 Corinthians 13, is right out front with everything. Joy is a proclamation of something. Peace is an understanding of something. Patience is a physical attribute to something. Gentleness, though, is just about being quiet and behind the scenes and just leading from the back and allowing the Spirit to do the work. And so it does get left off because that's part of what the whole point of being gentle is about.
Yeah.
That's not just a coincidence. That's part of how we understand what the Spirit is doing. Because if we are able to recognize gentleness in somebody, then that means that the Spirit is on full display to allow us to recognize that fact. Love, it's easy to see because there's a physical side to it. And we normally see that because of the way that they treat us.
Yeah.
We're like we talked about last week with contentment. Joy is not something that's easy to necessarily define or even that looks the same to everybody, but we can recognize it in somebody else even before we recognize it in our own self. Gentleness, being a divine balance that operates through faith alone, we normally are only going to fully recognize when we are allowing the Spirit to show us the balance in other people.
Yeah.
Whether that's the meekness or the justice side, both of those things are ones that we don't recognize unless we let the Spirit show it to us. Now, with the justice side, what that looks like, specifically in the New Testament, it's talking about the attitude of the leadership. So 1 Timothy 3, Titus 3. Both of these are where Paul's listing off qualifications for elders, bishops, whatever you want to call them. And both of them list gentleness as something that these leaders are supposed to show. But that gentleness that is there is the one of the justice side of gentleness, not just the meekness. It's supposed to be about bringing about a divine sense of justice within the body that they are overseeing through a quiet spirit and quiet strength. It's also used to describe our attitudes as believers. This is what we see in Philippians 4 when Paul says to let your gentleness be known to everyone. It's what James says in James 3. It's what 1 Peter says in 1 Peter 3. It's about our attitudes as believers. We should be looking for ways to gently see other people be put on an equal status with us.
Mm-hmm. Or even higher.
Or higher. This word is all about what sets us apart. So going back to when we talked the difference between set apart and separate. This is not what separates us out from the community. That's the opposite of a justice-centered gentleness.
Mm-hmm.
It is about what sets us apart in the community, because we are seeking justice and equity for everyone so that it brings about a humility and a peace among everyone. When this is actually applied well in our churches, we will have humble worship. We will have humble gatherings. We will actually have a body of believers that come together.
Yeah.
All hearts will be clear because there will be peace among us all. When we as believers are demonstrating this within our families, we are going to be able to have peace even in the midst of family. When we actually are doing this within our communities, we're not going to see peace among our community, but we are going to see us have peace among everyone within our community.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of what we see when we start to look at some of the pastors that are in more of the gang-infested inner cities, where the leaders of rival gangs are willing to meet together with the person. They have peace among both. Even though they don't have peace with each other, they are willing to have a conversation with somebody that is so epikes gentle that they are willing to set their guns down for a while and talk. Another example of this would be when you look at the story of Desmond Tutu out of South Africa. He was able to bring the non-whites and the whites within South Africa to the table together to talk about what is actually going on in the city. It was a black national that was able to bring the whites to the table. But it was not because of his power. It was because of his gentle strength and the gentleness and the work of the Spirit that we saw in the work of Desmond Tutu that allowed for the conversation to happen. That is gentleness.
Yeah.
Even though we don't ever associate it with gentleness.
No.
So we're going to break down why we don't associate it, why we don't talk about it, and what all of this actually means right after this break.
We'll be right back.
What's up, everybody? Joe here from Buddy Walk with Jesus. Buddy Walk with Jesus is a show designed to delve deep into the intimate reality of God's present kingdom through raw and honest conversations. And I'd like to invite you guys to join us as we continue on our journey through the book of Matthew. Whether you start from the beginning or jump in at the latest episode, we'd love to have you along for the ride as we seek to unpack the heart of God through the personhood of Jesus. You can find Buddy Walk with Jesus anywhere where you can find podcasts, including our newest home over on YouTube Podcasts. You can also head on over to facebook.com/buddywalkwithjesus. Engage with me over there, as well as our community group at the Buddy Walk community. Remember two very important things: that you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. Peace, y'all.
Today's a great day to start your own podcast. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your online reach.
Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online listened on all major platforms within minutes of finishing your first recording. We just switched to Buzzsprout for Season 2 and have immediately noticed the difference.
With Buzzsprout, you get a great-looking podcast website, audio players that you can drop into your websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and more. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and Buzzsprout and the Misfits want to help you get started.
Contact us for a free consultation call, and then visit our affiliate link to get started with Buzzsprout. Using this link not only helps support the Misfits, but it also gets you a $20 Amazon gift card. The teams at Buzzsprout and Ministry Misfits are passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. To find out more, go to www.ministrymisfits.com/affiliates.
We're back.
Hey everybody, we're back. We're still here. Brandon reminded me that I need to be more gentle in the middle of the break. And we are going to, we defined what it was.
Mm-hmm.
We used Webster's
Twice,
and then threw Webster's out because Webster's is completely unhelpful and the opposite of what we're actually talking about today. Because when we talk about gentleness from a theological and a biblical perspective, Webster's is completely opposite of what we are actually talking about.
Mm-hmm.
What we are talking about is two different Greek words, specifically, that Paul uses to describe a gentle spirit. Both of them are things that only are achieved through the fruit of the Spirit, the gifting of the Spirit to be able to do these things, the renewing of our minds, the fruits of the Spirit, the equipping of the saints, all of those different phrases that we use to describe this process. Just like when we talked about contentment last week, gentleness and the way that we are talking about it is only available to believers. And it shows itself in a way of meekness and humility, which is normally what we associate with it, even though we don't define it well.
Yeah.
But then it's also associated with a type of justice movement among believers that comes from the Spirit. And the example we used for that before we broke was looking at the life of Desmond Tutu in South Africa. That is what we're talking about today. And now we are going to start getting into why this topic, which should not be complicated, is in an American setting, and especially in a culture war era, and especially coming out of an evangelical mindset, not a Pentecostal mindset, even though that's what everybody accuses us of. So we kind of started this discussion when we started saying why it's never talked about. But we have to ask the question of why is this not actually talked about in today's American church culture? One of the reasons we just said is that it's not easy to define because English is a horrible language to have anything to do with.
Yeah. And if it's going to come from a classroom standpoint, we're going to go to Webster's and then see that, and all the kids are going to be like, no, not doing that.
Well, and most of the fruits of the Spirit are not easy to define in English, which shouldn't be that surprising because they weren't written in English, but we don't like to acknowledge that side of it either. Most of the fruits of the Spirit have different understandings than what we see when we just talk about the word in general. But gentleness, more so than any of the other fruits, due to the fact that the way that the word gentle and gentleness has other uses in English that we don't have with some of the other fruits of the Spirit, and that gentleness culturally seems to be becoming less and less and less important as a culture.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this, we can even in some ways go back and blame the Cold War theology stuff. We spent, math, 50 some years in a Cold War setting. A setting where we just came off of a place where the entire world saw horrific, horrible atrocities and was at war for 8-ish years fighting each other. And that was after a large portion of the world was dealing with depression, both financial and physical. And that was after another huge world conflict where everybody was fighting and everybody was angry with each other and the whole world was enveloped by war. And also everybody got sick from a giant pandemic. And so you have this pattern of war, sickness, famine, war, and then just war.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't leave much room for us to talk about having a meek, humble attitude and serving other people as better than ourselves.
No.
At least not culturally. And then when we look at, like we talked about a lot within how the American church approached this, we did not take a divinely balanced approach. We took the approach of, well, if the rest of the world is at war, we should be at war too.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to call it a spiritual war.
And put on the armor of God.
And put on the quote-unquote armor of God. But instead of actually putting on the quote-unquote armor of God, we instead are going to completely ignore the fact that there is an aspect of gentleness that would allow us to be a part of a warrior-type culture and still be gentle, which is the justice one.
Yeah.
It's about our attitudes. It's about the way we think about other people. It's the way we think about our enemies. We could have had gentleness in the midst of a culture that was constantly fighting against war and drought and famine. But instead, we chose what is it that's going to provide us with enough money to build giant buildings. And to do that, we had to reject gentleness as a whole. We don't see that with the other fruits of the Spirit.
No.
Maybe a little bit with love, which we defined already in another episode. Last week when we talked about contentment and joy, again, we talked about the fact that culturally this doesn't work out well in a capitalist society. Patience, nobody has time for that. You like that one?
Mm-hmm.
That was good, yeah. Self-control was taught. But again, not in a divine manner, this is character building. Kindness, Reverend Tov, because I can't remember his actual name, I think it's Ryan, on social media that we've been talking back and forth with quite a bit. His answer to our question as far as which one is the most not talked about, his answer actually was kindness. Because kindness in a lot of areas is looked as heresy, because to be kind to somebody, that obviously means you affirm everything about them, and so that means that you don't care about their sin.
Yeah. Or that you want something from them.
Or that you are wanting something from them. Or that you are just using them for
your benefit.
Which is different than just wanting something from them.
True.
Not by a lot, but it is a little bit different. Culturally, we have had different definitions for all these things, but gentleness especially is one that has always been taught as a weakness, not as a strength. And so this gets into more of our today cultural issues with this statement, because the accusation that is going to be thrown around the moment you start talking about gentleness is about effeminate manhood versus biblical manhood. And for those that aren't watching, there were a lot of air quotes thrown around in that entire statement. Biblical manhood, as described by a lot of people in American culture since early 2000s would be described as what?
I think I talked about a little bit at the beginning, like this rough, tough individual that takes care of their family. They're willing to stand up and speak for what is right, fight for what they would define as justice, and defend at all costs.
Who's the biblical character that they associate it with?
I almost said the non-biblical character.
No, the biblical character that they associate it with. There's one or two.
Okay. It was like Samson?
They'll say Samson because big tough guy that took care of the nation, ignoring the fact that 90% of his story was one of failure, both spiritually and morally.
Yeah. And it's funny because once he loses his hair, most people lose their hair. But anyways.
Right. The other guy that is associated with is David, right?
Yeah.
This is the man that's after God's own heart. This is a warrior king. This is somebody that worships God openly and unashamedly, and that also then marches into battle and takes out the giant and cuts off the foreskins of thousands of his enemies in order to win women. That's what we need. Ignoring the fact that David wrote over 100 or so poems, that David also had major moral and spiritual failures in the fact that he assaulted a woman and then killed her husband and then had to publicly mourn and publicly repent. And he did so in a way that was obviously so depressing and angry that his servants were afraid to even approach him.
Hmm.
And that destroyed him so much that he couldn't even do the right thing when the same thing happened to his daughter. We don't want to talk about that side of this biblical manhood.
Yeah.
Let's just focus on the muscles and the weapons and the wooing of women, and then also throw in there the fact, oh, look, see, we can worship God publicly.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what biblical manhood actually looks like.
Yeah, and that's where gentleness gets completely thrown out.
Because if we talk about being gentle, then we're removing all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And when we remove all those things, now we have fallen into queer theology. And if we fall into that, then we have completely lost all hope for humanity.
Mm.
Even though the thing that we see in both the example of David and in Samson is what was it that caused their moral failure and spiritual failures in the story?
Was it their sexual immorality?
It was just their denying of the gentleness we just talked about.
Mm.
David had completely lost sight of the justice side of gentleness. He had completely lost sight of the meek, humble side of gentleness because now he was king of Israel. Samson had no meekness or humility until he was completely broken down and all of his physical strength was removed from him. And then at those points was when they allowed the Spirit to actually show them what their attitudes should have been all along.
Mm.
And when they acknowledged that, God returned Samson's strength long enough for him to kamikaze the building. God returns the favor to David and even gives the favor to Bathsheba's second son that is born to David. Because they finally allowed the Spirit to do the work in them that they had been ignoring.
Mm.
And it's the same work that we want this to ignore the Spirit doing in us because we don't want to look weak.
Yeah.
Weakness is a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
So why would we want it? But what do the Beatitudes tell us?
Blessed are the poor in spirit.
Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek.
Mm-hmm.
Blessed are those that are persecuted. Blessed are those that are mistreated. Blessed are the weak. Because if they are weak, but they are content,
They are strong.
They are strong
spirit.
because it is the Spirit that is doing the work. It is the divine balance. You know, divine balance, again, when we talk, just say it like that, everybody thinks now we're getting into Buddhism and Taoism and Eastern culture and yoga and everything else. But divine balance is a biblical attribute.
Yeah.
But it doesn't come through meditation. It doesn't come through the stretching and the breathing and all these other things. A divine balance comes from us finally recognizing that it is not about us and it is all about him, and allowing God to do the work to balance us out so that we can be meek and humble, but still have the quiet strength to lead people towards justice, to lead people towards the cross, to lead our communities towards humble gathering together, to lead everybody towards an aspect of gentleness, which is the other reason that we don't want to talk about gentleness in today's society. Because gentleness requires justice.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as we say justice, we're immediately labeled as
woke
Marxist apostates.
Yeah, leftist, whatever.
Leftist, Marxist, apostate. We had one person call us Illuminati at one point. All of these different words to describe something that is required of us as believers because it only comes through the work of the Spirit. The anti-woke crowd is not going to like the idea of gentleness.
Mm-mm.
The anti-women crowd, anti-effeminate crowd is not going to like gentleness. But both of these things come from the Spirit of God himself.
Yeah.
That's why we should be talking about this. But that's also the very reason why it never gets talked about, or at least not very often.
And I think another area where it's important is within marriage as well, where, like what you talked about, we want to put our own strength first, and so we try to do things on our own. And that's why I think it's very important from a marriage standpoint, especially as a male, we try to make things seem like everything is okay, and try to fight through it a little bit more.
Well, not just everything is okay. Everything is okay because
I'm in control.
Or
that's what
I'm
say.
I will take the brunt of it. I will do this. I will find a way to fix it. But the word that we just used over and over and over in all of those was I.
Yeah.
That's not a biblical marriage.
No. And so that's why I think it's a good reminder too of another space where gentleness should be another aspect of the fruit of the Spirit. Where we see it present is within the marriage side, to say, all right, I'm allowing the Spirit to do the work where I fail as myself as a husband or for the wife, to allow God to do the work within the marriage and to solidify and to fight for justice, to fight for our love, to continue to do the work that God is calling for that family, whether it's specifically for their children, for their community, of all aspects within work, whatever that looks like.
Well, and this is one of the interesting things with what you just said here related to the marriage side of it, is that us as two married guys are going to look at this for a second just with guys.
Mm-hmm.
We just said the anti-effeminate crowd are ones that are going to hate the idea of hate the idea of gentleness because it's effeminate. We lost biblical manhood. Normally, the people that are making those statements are the patriarchists, who we've talked about before, say that the order in the house should be what?
God, man, women, children, doggos.
Dog, yeah. And gentleness is associated as something that we should see with the
women on down.
The women and the children, right? Not the men, because that somehow defiles manhood.
Yeah.
But what we just saw when we look at the words that Paul uses to describe gentleness is that gentleness is the descriptor for who within societies?
I guess I was going to say, I was thinking of God initially because of what we were talking about, but for men.
Leaders. Not necessarily men, just leaders. So if you are going to claim that men should not be gentle because they're supposed to lead the house, you just create an impossible scenario biblically. Because if you're going to claim that men should be the leaders in the home, okay, that's fine. Make that statement, but then also recognize the fact that that means that the men should be the ones that are the most gentle in that household. But we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
Instead, gentleness is an effeminate quality, and so it should go to the women. Doing that is actually doing exactly what you're claiming promoting gentleness is going to do, because you are actually at that point giving away your leadership when you are assigning gentleness to somebody else.
And I would say even potentially hardening that part of your own heart.
Right. Which at that point disqualifies you as a leader within your own homes.
Yeah.
Now, we also have made the statement multiple times that we don't buy into the hierarchy anyway. That biblically we can show the hierarchy ended at the cross.
Yeah.
And gentleness, if it is a fruit of the Spirit, and we are saying that we are marrying other believers, the idea of unequal yoke, which is another discussion for another time that has already been requested. Yeah, I know. I'm sure you like that one. The idea of marrying other believers is that if you're marrying another believer, then gentleness should be seen by everybody within that household. It should be seen by everybody within our community of faith, because that shows that the Spirit is working.
Yeah.
And if the Spirit is working, then we will see gentleness both in the humility of ourselves and in the humble actions of trying to raise other people up, which is the justice side of this whole thing. The moment that you try to make the statement that men in a marriage should not be gentle, they should just lead with authority, you have completely created a unbiblical option that cannot even be achieved.
Yeah. And we go back to the fruits of the flesh.
Right.
Where that falls into more of that side.
Right.
Of everything.
Now, this is why it's important for us to actually have the discussion. Because like we said, it goes beyond just what is gentleness. It goes into what does it look like? How does this apply? How does this apply within our marriages we just looked at?
Yeah. Because I think it is easier for us to, as we always talk about, it's easier for us to fall back into the flesh, to not be gentle.
Right.
That's our natural flesh.
And we do so
attitude.
in a way that we are able to, going back, we had another perfect example of this online yesterday of what I've been saying for the past couple of years. The most quoted verse of the Bible in American evangelicalism is Luke 10:38. Where the man trying to justify himself said, well, who is my neighbor? Because it's about justifying our own action to not do what Christ or the Spirit has already directed us to do.
Yeah.
We see this within our marriages. We see this within our ministries. How many times how often do we hear stories of spiritual abuse coming out of a pulpit?
Too many.
It's because we've denied this aspect of leadership. It's a qualification for ministry. Paul, in every area that everybody wants to hype on as far as this is what pastoral ministry qualifications are, even though technically the word pastor is not used there, all have the word gentleness as a descriptor of the person that is in the leadership position within ministry. It has to be, because if it's not, we end up having ministries of conceit and pride. If it's not, we have ministries that oppress other people rather than preach justice and freedom for all people. It's a requirement for ministry to be gentle. So when we stand up there and just scream, repent or perish, or, going back into the whole thing of when people try to promote, people want to keep re-preaching sinners in the hands of an angry God. There's no gentleness involved in Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God, because it's all about the torture of people that don't believe like us.
Mm-hmm.
There's no gentleness. There's no justice there. The Spirit of God is absent at that point. You cannot have ministry without this. So when you sit there and scream about what God hates, rather than who God loves and what God desires for all those that he loves, we have lost complete sight of what God has actually directed us to do. The Spirit is not going to be there. It's going to be the works of the flesh. It's a qualification for our spiritual renewal, going back to Romans 12. The renewing of our mind changes our hearts and our mindsets on everything, including what the definition of gentleness even is. Because like we said, the world's understanding of gentleness is the exact opposite of what the Spirit's expectations of gentleness actually is.
Yeah.
If you are going to have spiritual renewal, gentleness is going to be the byproduct. If it's not there, there's something that you still have not renewed yet. Whether it's our mind or our speech or our attitude or the way we view other people, something still needs worked on.
And I think for some people, they need to hear this, like, that's okay, and that's okay.
Right. We're not saying it happens overnight.
Yeah.
None of this happens overnight.
And honestly, I think God appreciates that clarity to have within ourselves, for that quietness to sit down in his presence.
For a gentle spirit.
Correct. To say self-reflection through the Spirit, to say this is an area where I'm recognizing where I am not aligned with Christ and need renewed and this cleaned.
And it may even be something as simple as the fact that I have allowed myself to be humble. I have allowed myself to be meek. I have allowed myself to do the first part. But I have not allowed myself to submit to the fact that this now means that my gentleness is expressed through seeking justice for other people. Or it could be the other way around of, I've allowed my gentleness to seek justice for other people, but I've still not allowed that to humble me and allow me to recognize the Spirit is the one doing all of it. It's a qualification for spiritual renewal, but it doesn't happen overnight. Just like we talked about with contentment, and we've talked about with love, and we've talked about with peace, and we've talked about with everything that we have ever talked about. None of this stuff can happen overnight. That's why it's about discipleship. Finding somebody that will lead you towards this goal, but lead you in gentleness. Because if they're not leading you in gentleness, you are still going to be missing that piece. And it's also another one of those things that is what is said that the non-believers among us should recognize within us. Because again, this is not the gentleness that we talk about when we read the dictionary. This is a gentleness that only comes from the work of the Spirit within us. And if it's the work of the Spirit within us, people are going to take notice.
Yeah.
How can you be so calm in the midst of persecution? How can you be so loving in the way that you rebuke someone? How can you be so authoritative without ever once raising your voice? How can you raise your voice so regularly without coming across as authoritative?
Yeah.
Which is the one that I get accused of a lot because I'm not quiet. That is the kind of things that people take notice of. Because it's not us that they're taking notice of. It's the Spirit's work within us that has made us suddenly be set apart from those around us that have no knowledge of how to do this.
Yeah, and I like what you said. I think of both believers and non-believers will continue to twist and turn and try to make certain situations appear as if you are not gentle because you stand up for something or you're quiet in this aspect. And so they'll twist what that gentleness looks like. So again, going back to the Spirit and the quietness of our time with Christ, to just be in His presence, it truly goes back to, do we have that peace that we find with our self-reflection of, was I gentle here? God, do I have peace with how I handled this situation, of what you in the Spirit called me to speak into, and not just how I decided to act out in the flesh that day, but that I have peace with how I handled that situation or how I spoke here.
And now we're back into how all of the, why it's a fruit cocktail, not just, a single service item. Because in order for us to be aware of where we were not gentle, or where we could have been more gentle, or in some cases where, like, wow, how in the world was I able to be this gentle?
Yeah.
It's a peace aspect. It's a patience aspect. It's a love aspect. It's a self-control of, I'm willing to go back and look and see if I actually did this.
Mm-hmm.
It's a humility. It's a understand. All of these different things that we see with the other fruits all allow us to be able to evaluate within ourselves, did I actually do what I was called to do here? And that's part of why, going back to the definitions we got out of the Greek, this idea of a divine balance is so critical to an actual understanding of what gentleness is, because it is a understanding that there are going to be times where I feel like I am not being gentle, but that I know I'm supposed to do something, and trusting that the Spirit is going to work it out in gentleness when it comes out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Or that the Spirit is doing a work within the other person that I am talking to hear the love and the peace and the patience in what I am saying, and not just hear harsh conceit. And trusting the Spirit to do all of this, which gives us the peace that gives us the divine balance of being able to understand that if I am trusting that I am doing what the Spirit is telling me to do, that even if it doesn't make sense, and even if it feels like I am going to be causing more harm than good, that I trust that the Spirit is either going to do the work that He is telling me to do, or that the Spirit is going to give me the humility to recognize my mistake to make it right later.
Yeah.
And that is something that cannot be done outside of Christocentric living.
Mm-hmm.
And a trusting of the Spirit rather than what Paul refers to as a stifling of it. So let us know what you think as far as if this makes more sense or less sense, or what gentleness actually looks like biblically in the way that you are looking at all of this. Let us know what you think. All the social media channels, it's at Ministry Misfit. There's the contact us on the website. If you're on Good Pods, there's the discussion boxes, all that good stuff. We've got stuff coming up that is quote unquote planned that we're excited about, that should be fun. We've had a lot of requests for different topics lately. And so we're going to try to hit at least these 4 specifically. So we've had a lot of requests to actually do a full breakdown of the Celtic versus Roman styles of evangelism. So Dr. Greg Linville is going to be joining us, and hopefully before the end of the summer.
Yeah.
And most likely it'll be a live stream format, so we'll let you know exactly when we get that on the schedule. That way, if you have more questions beyond what you guys already are asking me about all of this online, you'll be able to ask Dr. Linville directly. So that is going to be coming up before the end of the summer, hopefully in the next few weeks. We're also going to be hopefully getting Pastor Joel Bowman back on, this time though as Joel Bowman, the
MSW.
Yes, or an LCSW specifically to talk mental health within the church, both from a professional mental health standpoint and a theological standpoint, to look at all of that. We also we finally got a bribe on the table last night to get him also to to do a little Patreon extra for us, talking about both the theology and the mental health around the gun violence situation within the United States. And so we're hoping to have all of that here in the next month or so as well. We're eventually going to get Rachel Hunka on to talk women in the church. It's something that all of our schedules are trying to align, and we're kind of sort of zeroing in on a general idea. It is coming. We'll get there. And then the other big one that has been asked about that we're going to talk about is we are actually going to sit down and define biblical authority and what the word authority actually means when we look at it from a biblical perspective. Much like what we did today with gentleness, we're going to look at that word authority and why almost nobody uses it correctly in today's world when they're talking about it. So stay tuned for all of that. Also, assuming that I don't get called in for jury duty on Friday.
True, you do have that coming up.
Yeah. This Friday, if you're listening to it the week of release, I'm supposed to be back over on Kingdom on the Road with our friends Joe and Aunt and brother Matthew, specifically talking the Imago Dei and what that means and how we read it and why all of it matters and all that good stuff. So if I am not called in, we go live at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time on Friday morning. And it'll at least be on the Kingdom on the Road and Buddy Walk channels. We may even be able to get it shown on our normal Misfit channels, but we don't know for sure about any of that yet. So stay tuned for all that. Go check out Kingdom on the Road right now. Anyway, they're doing a lot of work similar to what we're doing here in terms of how do we read this stuff. They just went over the fall last week. They've gone over the different ways we read creation, all of these different things. But specifically this week, they're looking at the Imago Dei, and so I'm hopefully going to be able to join them. We'll see how it goes. In the meantime, merch store is still up. Go get your Misfits merch, the Tikva gear, all the good stuff, all the Misfit Paul stuff, which, speaking of Misfit Paul stuff, if you were a part of birthday month, so
for the month of June,
anybody that was a member of Patreon for the month of June, anybody that sent a Cash App donation during the month of June, we need you to follow up with us because the information that Patreon told me I was able to access, I'm not able to access. So if you were a part of birthday month, we need you to get in touch with us with your shirt size as well as where you want us to send it. So that way we can be sure you can get it. Because again, Patreon told me they would give me the information and now they're not. So, follow up with us if you were a member, if you were part of birthday month. We want to make sure you get your Misfit Paul gear, and can celebrate all that with us and look awesome doing it. So, again, next week, TBD. We gave you a list of one of the 4 things it'll be. Not quite sure which one, but one of these 4 will be happening. So stay tuned to the website. Stay tuned to social media to make sure that you don't miss when we're going to go live or if we've got any other polls or things like that going on to help us get these things going. So stay tuned for all that, and we'll see you next week.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/Ministry Misfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits.